Welcome to Goods and Services track of the PortGen 2021 virtual event. We'd like to welcome everybody today, and we have a little housekeeping to do before we get started too much. We'd like to remind everyone to go ahead and edit your name and company name if you can, and that way we'll be able to get your attendance down. And if you have any bandwidth problems, you're welcome to turn off your video. That'll help save some bandwidth for you. So today we have, it's all about IT. And this first session that we have Lynn Terwoerds here from Digital Resilience. And Lynn is going to talk to us about cybersecurity for small and medium enterprises. But before Lynn starts, I would like to thank the Port of Seattle and also the Northwest Small Business Transportation Resource Center for helping us get this program up and running. And so I see that Tina Boyd is here from the Port of Seattle. So Tina, would you like to say a few words?
Welcome everybody again. We are now towards the end, wrapping up. We only have one more week. I like to give you some homework. I know you weren't expecting homework from me, but it's nothing major. If all of you don't mind emailing me a little short blurb, could be just a couple sentences, nothing more than a paragraph, on what you got out of the advanced PortGen, what you liked about it. I don't want to know what you don't like about it yet. I'm sure that'll come with a survey. But we put comments with your company name, if you don't mind, of participants that attended our PortGens. They'll go on things like newsletters, websites. So if all of you can do that, I asked the same thing from the A&E group also. So I will make sure to put my email contact in the chat, okay? So have fun, everybody, okay?
Thanks, Tina. And with that, I will hand it over to Aisha Kadri. Aisha is the program director for the Small Business Transportation Resource Center. So we'd like to welcome Aisha to say a few words.
Thank you so much, Leslie, and thank you, Tina, for being here and being a part of this workshop series. We want to thank you all for being here, and as always, Leslie, Tina, and I are available and ready to answer any questions that you guys might have throughout the workshop series, and even afterwards. So please don't hesitate to give us a connection. And then I'm going to go ahead and include my contact information in the chat box as well. So you'll be able to reach out to me that way. All right. And with that, I'll give it back to you, Leslie.
Thanks, Aisha. So today, Lynn is going to give us an update on all things cybersecurity. And as we speak, there's like breaking news on cybersecurity and what's going on in the real world. And actually, I think Lynn has a poll that she might pop up for you sometime during the event. And we invite you to ask questions. You can raise your hand, you can put it in the chat, and we'll try to address those as we get them. So with that, Lynn, we'll just turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it, and appreciate all of the work that's gone in to make this possible. As was already said, I'm going to focus on small and medium enterprise issues. So just very quickly, I actually have now over 30 years. I realize I've got to update this slide of cybersecurity experience. Spent 10 years at Microsoft, was involved in the early days of incident response. So if you have had the pleasure of remembering Blaster, Sasser, Code Red, and NIMDA, I was actually doing that type of incident response, coordinating with the product teams to create the fixes, all the way through that process to taking press calls at the time. So I went to Barclays Bank in London at the headquarters and worked as the head of security architecture and standards and security engineering for the global bank. Came back and joined Oracle and spent some time there working with and helping them become HIPAA compliant in their global healthcare business unit. And today I really split my time between president of the board of a local nonprofit called the Northwest Maritime Center. You may have heard of us recently as partners in the Maritime High School in Seattle. And then I have my own consulting business, and I'm an advisor to a cloud infrastructure startup company. So enough about me. Let's talk about what we're going to do today. So the objectives here is to highlight small and medium enterprise cybersecurity challenges, look at it in a structured way. I want to address the common small and medium enterprise cybersecurity risks that you find yourselves, I think, oftentimes realizing those risks, actionable recommendations, and of course, at the end, speaking of ransomware, and thank you, Andrew, for letting me know that today a major broadcaster and sadly a company that makes candy has been victims of a ransomware attack. So one of our practice exercises at the end here will involve hopefully thinking through end-to-end ransomware attacks. So let's just take a look here at some of the ugly numbers. Oops, I see. Okay. So as you can see, it began really with attacking us via email with what are called phishing attacks. Small and medium-sized enterprises are still very vulnerable to this, as well as the everyday consumer, what I call the consumer market. There's been a tremendous increase in that since 2016. So in 3 years, 2019 basically saw a serious rise in the number of these. Larry Poneman is he's actually getting quite on in years these days, but many years ago he had the great foresight to say, you know what, every time there's a data breach, I wonder how much that costs a company. And just because of the great researcher and numbers guy and the connections he's had, he has tracked that year in, year out now for, it's got to be, well, I think it's been well over maybe 10, 15 years. But we have the 2021 numbers so far. We're seeing an increase in data breaches and the cost of a data breach going up to 4.2 million. This in this pandemic, in the global pandemic with the remote workforce, which is an additional factor, has increased the cost of a data breach, totaling in the neighborhood of 4.96 million. So this is some pretty eye-popping numbers. In addition to the remote workforce, or I mean, as well as that, you will notice too that ransomware attacks are up by 148%. So ransomware attacks are your modern day, digital hostage situation. I find a way into your company. I take your data, I encrypt that data. I tell you that you can't have the keys to it unless you pay me in Bitcoin. And, I insulate my risk against you because I'm normally operating in a country that does not have an extradition treaty with the United States. And I'm getting my payment not through your bank, but through a secure method of payments these days. So, okay. When I look at, hang on here, I'm continuing to admit people. So when I look at some of the challenges, top challenges for the small and medium enterprise space is, I think at the top of the list is just a overall low cybersecurity awareness. the ability to identify and then protect sensitive information. Part of the problem is even for large companies, data classification is the term that's used, but identifying the data and really dividing it up into, what is most either high sensitivity or high protection, medium, low, even putting it into 3 buckets. There's a lot of work normally involved in that. A limited budget. Large companies don't have endless budgets, but when we get into the small and medium enterprise space, this really becomes a limiting factor. And so I think the ability to leverage existing resources and knowledge and what's free is extremely important. I've had a very fruitful career. I've never ever looked for work, and it's because in cybersecurity, it's built-in job security, but it also means that the pool of people out there who are truly qualified as cybersecurity experts is very finite. And even large companies with plenty of bonus money and other incentives are vying for talent out there that leaves small and medium enterprises really don't even have a chance for access to this. The regulatory landscape as well, you probably don't have your own internal corporate legal department as many large companies do. So understanding the regulatory landscape, might be seminars, maybe conferences, and other ways that you learn about this. The shadow IT and personal devices is also a challenge for your space. The shadow IT, it used to be the server or computer in the closet. Today, it's an ad hoc wireless network that someone's running maybe in a fabrication department or some physically remote department. Maybe the signal's not really overly strong to them, the wireless, and or their network connectivity. So they're doing things on their own, not because of they're malicious or anything like that, but because they just want to get business done. Okay. The whole move to digital transformation, getting to the cloud, moving workloads to the cloud is also a very daunting and can be very expensive endeavor. And of course, with awareness, low cyber awareness also comes lack of management support at times. And it's not, again, because anyone is being malicious or bad or incompetent. It's just that there are many priorities and pressures in a business, and cybersecurity may not be at the top of that. And I totally get that. So for today, I want to focus on a pretty straightforward framework of people, process, and technology. This is a time-proven way to divide up the world, especially as we look at cybersecurity and data protections. To be able to look at that in these 3 buckets allows us not to get overcomplicated. I know, and this is not a replacement for many of the frameworks that I know that you are involved in, with like controlled unclassified information and the NIST SB 500-171. This is not replacing the 14 domains and the 110 controls, right? This is just a simplified framework so that we can facilitate a discussion around the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data. So let's begin breaking up and looking into these 3 areas. So when we talk about overall, when we look at cybersecurity, we look at the risks, we begin to put them in the buckets. And the first bucket we'll look at is people, okay? So managing cybersecurity issues and risks with people. Oftentimes, there is not a major point of contact in a small and medium-sized business. Larger organizations, Port of Seattle, large companies like Microsoft have chief information security officers, chief information officers, chief data officer, things like that, roles that are big, well-paid, and they have the responsibilities ultimately for many of the controls that belong in that environment. Small and medium-sized businesses do not. You may have a subject matter expert. You may have a point of contact, but someone in your organization needs to be the go-to person. You also need the buy-in. And along with buy-in is that idea of the management support. It would be excellent if management could communicate directly to staff, certainly on an annual basis, that the policies and the practices that go around cybersecurity are important and that they support them. Awareness is also very important. It goes in with cybersecurity training. And while you may not have endless budget to afford some of the more sophisticated trainings out there, there are resources. There are resources that you can at least begin having conversations internally. And employees are eager to know, well, what do I do? You know, wow, I use my phone for work, but it's also my personal phone. Or, wow, somebody just faxed me this invoice and oh my God, it looks like we are, you know, we should have paid this eons ago. And it looks like there's, you know, surcharges associated because of late payment and so on. And actually what it is a scam. And a person who thinks, oh gosh, I'm not sure, not having a point of contact, not having the awareness, not having the education, oftentimes you can fall victim to things like that. And that's a very common realized risk, by the way. And it's happening through, you know, the Fred Flintstone and Barney Rubble technology called literally the physical fax machine. Cybersecurity policies are also very important. Many times those policies beget procedures and practices in your company that will come back and especially when those procedures are followed, provide tremendous insulation against ransomware attacks, malware, and so on. Third-party risks too. Here for the smaller and medium-sized businesses, you may have outsourced your IT. When we get to the topic of ransomware, who does your backups and how secure are they? When was the last time you did a restore so that you know in your continuity plan that you actually had the ability to get data back in a timely manner is very, very important. So vetting third parties, going back and reviewing, extremely important. And as you can see here, my little factoid is 84% of cyber attacks actually rely on some form of social engineering. The fax invoice or the you know, the bogus invoice, it does require some level of being socially engineered by having that invoice look right, appear close enough to an invoice or a vendor that, you know, someone in your industry would commonly use. Okay, so what I'm doing here, hang on here, let me move this here. What I'd like is for the participants, I'm going to do a poll, okay, and let me see here. Oops. Here's the first one. Okay, this is people. Great. I'm going to launch this poll. I want to give you an opportunity to tell me which one of in the people process technology of people, which one of these topics would you like to do a deeper dive? So that poll should be up on your screen right now. I want to do this very quickly so that we don't get too much time go by here. Okay. All right. We have an equal. Looks like we have an equal between employee awareness and cybersecurity training. Okay, perfect. I'm going to end the poll if you don't mind. Okay.
Hey, Lynn,
yes.
Can I interrupt real quick?
Yes.
One of our participants is visually impaired. And so maybe if you could read the options.
Oh, sure.
And then if he can just let us know, you know, which one he thinks he would like to have.
Sure,
or,
right.
You know, if he doesn't want to respond, that's fine. But for the future polls, we'll do a reading also. Thank you.
Right, thank you. I appreciate that. Yes, and you can also use the chat function. I'll take a look at that. So the choices under the people area is buy-in, employee awareness, cybersecurity training, cybersecurity policies, and third-party risk. And let me just make sure that I'm looking at the chat so that I'm not missing anything here. All right, so we had an even split between employee awareness and cybersecurity training. So in yesterday's A&E session, people were very good about going off of mute. Are there specific questions or concerns, or do you want me just generically to go into this? I think I see an M. Ross getting off of mute. Would you like to?
I would say that your emphasis being generic should cover a broad base of areas, and that's what I would like to hear.
Okay, all right, thank you. Thank you, appreciate that. All right, so in terms of employee awareness, I'm gonna take a look here at some of my my notes here. I think that the overall emphasis here is that employees want to know, well, what do I do? Okay, so employee awareness, that can be heightened in a lot of different ways. First of all, I would highly encourage you to either look internally or even ask employees, what are the things that concern you about cybersecurity? And I pretty much guarantee you're going to hear things like, well, you know what? I don't want to click on the wrong link in email, because I have a professional and likely a personal vested interest in not bringing malware on my computer. And, you know, I think some of the other things that you're going to hear is, well, you know, how do I know if something's wrong at work? How do I know if an invoice is fake? Well, or what other kind of attack should I be worried about at work? Some companies either publish or if you have like an internal website, or this could even be a document, right, that you're sharing on and maybe an annual basis that gets reviewed again, of frequently asked questions, you know, what about my personal phone? And it gives you an opportunity to get some of that cybersecurity training in there as well, because you can bring up issues about how, you know, why antivirus is so important to have on your devices. And maybe it's an opportunity for you to let everybody know, and an awareness, but it's also a training mechanism to let them know, you know, if you've got an Apple, like an Apple laptop, guess what? You can't assume that you don't need to have antivirus protection, because yes, they are vulnerable. And in the past year, there have been some really good examples of attacks that have been specifically against you know, the operating system for MacBooks. The other thing too, that I would suggest in this area too, is don't forget the physical security. And this is going to be different for different businesses. But here's examples. What an example of physical security is, bringing up an ad hoc wireless network in maybe a remote location, because really our networking isn't so great, or maybe the wireless signal doesn't come to us so strong, is both a physical and a cyber related vulnerability. Someone who is potentially supports, you know, it could be your CEO, physical security, walking away from the desk. Maybe the person's doing payroll and so on, leaving computers open for anyone to walk up to and see when they're not appropriately locked is, again, another one of those both physical and cyber related security issues. So don't forget physical security. Same thing goes if you have areas in your business that need to be only certain personnel, or maybe it's, you know, someone from the outside should not be able to come in that particular area. If you are working with the government and you have controlled unclassified information, or CUI, you know that part of your requirements is to, for example, if you have drawings and contracts and things like that, and they're physically printed out, it's possible that what that is, it's a backup and it's in a locked you know, drawer at your facility. You want to make sure that not only the access, but that the is controlled, but also that it is locked and secured from anyone coming up and opening up and taking a look at drawings, contracts, things like that. Okay. Cybersecurity training. Here's something that I encourage you. This particular training, I tell you at the end of this, this deck has been made available to you. You have the ability to share that in your organization. You have the ability, I believe, to maybe even take this presentation and also to repurpose this and to streamline it for your own employees, and to take the time to either have them do an online training in person or a Zoom, or even record a Zoom training that's particular for your company. So employee awareness and cybersecurity training go hand in hand. The point of contact is really important. Somebody somewhere has to be, oh, you know what? I'm going to go to Marnie because I know that this concern that I have, or I got this email, or I got this invoice, or whatever it may be. Say, I probably can walk by her desk, or, you know, call her up or whatever, and she'll likely give me good advice. It's better than that person sitting there fretting on their own, wanting to enable the business, but also not to put the business at risk, and feeling that there's no resource or contact for anyone to help that individual. Okay. Any other questions or comments? I want this to be interactive. So, all right, well, we'll keep going. All right, so the next area we're going to take a look at here is process. And just so you know, the cybercrime report. So the FBI reports in 2020 that cybercrime was up 69.4%. The year-over-year change was drastic, and they were absolutely inundated with just overall with the reports themselves. So the actual cybercrime, though, the real cybercrime that they actually investigated, up 69.4%. That's quite an increase. So in the process area is all about audits. Who checks for compliance, right? And in a small and medium enterprise, this may be something that you're looking at on an annual basis, and it may be a risk-based type of audit, and it may be very informal. So I don't want you to think of one of the big accounting firms and someone coming in and doing a formal audit. It may not be that, unless you're getting audited for you know, the CMMC compliance, or you know, maturity level, or for some other regulatory reason. But this is about things like, you know, testing for vulnerabilities, software updates, making sure that, you know, all of your devices have antivirus, or if there's a VPN that everyone should use, that they're using the right one, or a password keeper, things like that. You know, those types of checks. And they should be risk-based. Some things are more, I guess, horrible or higher risk to your company than others. And so you may be doing this annually on a risk basis, but I would love for you to get into that mindset. Incident response. Wow, I just don't know what to say here, because the level of attacks to the smaller and medium-sized enterprises has increased just tremendously over the past 5 years. It's actually an astronomical increase. So incident response plans do not have to be 100 pages long, but someone at some time, right, needs to get together and look at your organization and say, if we had a data breach, if someone successfully launched a ransomware attack against us, and all of a sudden now we don't have access to a certain data, or maybe everything is gone on an important server, it is very important for you to have a plan in place. Who's on point? If there's a call tree or an outreach, who gets the outreach? Are we in a situation that requires, some of you who were on my session yesterday, there is a threshold in the state of Washington after a certain number of breaches where you actually have to publicly report that to the Attorney General's office. What's that number? Okay. You should know that, and it's important. And your business changes too. So over time, that may not be important, because even if you had a major breach, you would never reach that threshold. But your companies grow and change. You get contracts, or you think, wow, I have access to more records than I ever thought now that I think about it. because of the connections that I have now with other organizations, or maybe some of the, the partnerships in that. Passwords continue to be the bane of every cybersecurity person. I personally feel I have hit my absolute limit of the number of passwords that I can humanly remember. Yes, I have a password keeper, and I took advantage of Microsoft's ability to have no passwords to get into my my email, my Microsoft email account. I do use two-factor authentication, and two-factor could be getting a text code texted to me in order to complete a username, password, and then as a final step to log on. There's other things too, authenticator type applications that are also what are called out of band. That's what I'm using to get to, is it sam.gov and some of the other important connections that I have. I don't even bother with a password, because what I want to do is I want to connect by having them send me a code through an authenticator. It used to be an RSA token. It's now an app or authenticator app that's sitting on my phone. Software updates are clearly important. This is a big cost, and also from a process perspective, sometimes very difficult for the small and medium-sized businesses, because applying patches in your environment may mean stopping the business or interrupting a process. So having this part of a business change, if you will, is extremely important and also needs a lot of thought. You also have to think about those remote workers. So whenever possible, especially for antivirus, especially for OS and things like that, if there's any way for that to be an automated and a scheduled process, so that someone doesn't, a resource in your organization doesn't have to go in and chase others in order to update, you'll have enough with your own systems, I believe. And obviously data protection. It's not only about customer data, it's your own employee data and intellectual property, which could include something as simple as a business process that is unique, that makes your business unique. So it doesn't have to be a patent or a drawing or something like that, right? All right, let's go ahead and let's have you go ahead and pick. So in the process category, I'm going to run the poll here to give you an opportunity to pick between audits, incident response, passwords, software updates, data protection. So please go ahead and let me know what is of interest to you, and I will data protection. Oh, we're all over the board. Okay, audits, passwords, and data protection. Okay, let me do this here. And let me see. I don't see anything in the chat. I'm going to end the poll. These are big areas. Does anyone want to just get off of mute and talk to me a little bit about what your particular concern is? Like with passwords, is it complexity? Is it the number of passwords? Is it if a password keeper is compliant with the NIST 171? Go ahead, Marnie.
Mine.
Yeah, this is Marnie. I just wanted to double check. I heard you had commented about the app authentication app for specifically sam.gov through the login.gov. I know that they have multiple ways that you can validate your login. Are there specific systems that are compliant, that are recognized, that can be used across the board? Like how, if I wanted to use one of those authentication apps or password keepers, how do I go about doing that without having to have multiple, depending on the systems I'm trying to track, or, if I'm trying to simplify my life and create more efficiency, how do I go about that with that with still being protected?
Right. So here's the cool thing. I believe at sam.gov, they'll tell you which authenticator apps they work with. So for example, I know they work with Microsoft Authenticator, and I believe that, is it Semantic? I've got to look at my phone here. I know there's another authenticator app that I use in addition to the Microsoft Authenticator app. So you'll be told and there aren't, as I understand or know, there aren't so many that it becomes confusing. But as often is the case, there isn't an industry standard, okay? With password keepers, what you do is when you get to the NIST security controls, what you have to look is at their encryption guidelines, and then you need to pick a password keeper that meets the encryption standards. That's what makes that work, okay? Because there's lots of password keepers out there. And by the way, some of them are malware. So there are well-known brands, and also I think there's some guidance out there in terms of the password keepers that are commonly used.
Thank you.
But,
Yeah, there's always, because you always find the free versions of the password keepers, which, you know, run away. Has been my suggestion. But yeah, I think it just, like you said, there's too many passwords for me to hold in my brain anymore. So
Oh God, yes.
you track them. How do you keep track of them? How do you remember them? How do you keep them secured? All of them have to be different. They all have different regulations. So I'll definitely look into that some more. Thank you very much.
Well, and the other thing is, just let me warn you, I have to tell you that if you forget the password to your password keeper,
I think that's what actually is holding me back from getting one, is the fear of not being able to access all that information.
yeah, that's a real problem. I actually, I haven't personally, because I'm very, very careful on that one. But with I just looked, I have Data Vault on my phone and Passkeep on my computer. And I'm not, again, I'm not telling you that that's what you should use, but I did spend some time making sure that at least they were legitimate. That was my number one concern, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Thank you.
No worries. Other questions?
What are your thoughts toward having a sound recovery plan, particularly in view of the fact that we have machine language, and there's a lot of different types of ways that a small business or medium-sized business would encrypt their data in the cloud, their files in the cloud. You can have a differential backup along with the overarching backup of everything. So what do you recommend as a plan because it's the plan that really strengthens how robust your recovery is going to be. So
oh yeah.
What's best for a small and medium business?
That is actually a fabulous question, because that is at the I think the crux. If you say, oh my gosh, I'm worried about ransomware. If you're worried about ransomware, which all of us should be, your number one thought should be about your backups and what type of recovery planning you've done. That's at the heart and soul of your defense against. It's the difference between someone telling you, you send me X number of dollars in Bitcoin, and you telling them to go pound sand. So yesterday I talked about the 3-2-1 rule, even though this is for from the European Information Security Agency, I would still, with the NISA, I still think that very much applies here. So when you think, it's all about risk-based. So the things that are most valuable to you, it could be contracts, right? It could be copies of your contracts. It could be your intellectual property. It may be a customer list. I don't know. But whatever that is, you must identify those things, right, that you have electronically that are of most value and could have the most devastating impact to your company. And for that, you need 3 copies, okay? And it could be digital and physical, but you need to have 3 places where you have the ability to come and bring that back. And it's not just for malicious acts, it's also for natural disaster, okay? Because it may be one or the other, right? And then the other thing to keep in mind in the 2 is always 2 places. So I totally understand backup to the cloud. And if you're working with a third-party provider, if you're working, even if you're doing this yourself with cloud backup, what's important to understand here is, again, the more valuable things should be have 2 separate locations. Now, you know, when I was at the bank, you know, what happens is we would store certain encryption keys may be stored in hardware, right? But a copy of it, encryption keys may also have another different physical location backup. Okay, that's a little bit esoteric, but it could also mean there's certain financial records. There may be any number of things that might be backed up through your third-party IT organization, but you may actually ask them to separate physically where that there's a copy of the backup in 2 separate places, right? And of course, you should at least have one place that is offsite to where you are. So if you're backing up everything to a backup server at your physical location, that single point of failure doesn't give you a guaranteed path back. And I would tell you, years ago, I was at well, this dates me, but I was at a paper plant, and they were backing up to tape. And one of the problems is the physical environment. When I asked them, I said, we need to do a test restore of some of the data. And we found out that the very fine dust from the papermaking process actually rendered all of their backups useless. Because those backups at the time were being done physically on site in a hostile environment. So there's lots and lots of things to take into consideration. Have the plan, practice the plan, back up appropriately, and for the love of God, please practice restoring. And ask yourself, your third-party vendor, okay, if you restore me, well, like how long does that take? If I had to restore everything, how long would that take? How long for critical data, and so on. It's so exceptionally important. I can't tell you, even in large companies, it takes effort and planning to think about these things. But when you need it, that's not the time you want to find out that you either can't restore, or the restoration, you might as well just pay the ransom because you're going to be out of business anyway. Right? Any other questions or comments? So we covered passwords, and to some extent, I think the protection of our own data. So, and of course, along with everything else, incident response, whether it's business continuity and disaster recovery plans or incident response plans, it's important to have them, and it's important to practice them. Okay, perfect. Okay, let's keep going here. I don't know how long we have today. Okay, so in technology, so network security, this is, I think we're all familiar with firewalls, but this is about where are my connections? Network security is, I can see my physical office, but where am I virtually? And today we are distributed well beyond what is originally called the perimeter, meaning that people are outside working from home. They may be on site. And your company may have people who are remote because they're actually at your customer site, and so on. And so that brings a dynamic in terms of where are all of my endpoints, if you will. And also with wireless connections we've talked about already. Technology is also about antivirus, anti-malware, having all systems automatically update, especially in the AV anti-malware. I don't know if you know this or not, but if you have the Microsoft internal malware updates, you'll find out that I can run those every couple of hours and they'll have a new signature files for me. So it gives you an idea when you talk to the AV people, they're rewriting against known and changed and modified malware and AV signatures. This is something that goes on every day, all day. Please encrypt important information. That could be on disks, it could be on your computer. You need to make sure, thank you, to have your VPNs. The idea of a VPN is that you have, it's like having a tunnel. It's like talking through a tube so that people on the outside can see that there's data moving back and forth. But what the VPN does is it makes that a private connection between 2 points. And so remote workers should be connecting to your corporate network, or even it might be a file share server that's in your office or at another location. That should be done through a what do you call it? A VPN or a virtual private networking system. Monitoring obviously is important, right? And everybody tells you to monitor, but this is another thing. You can't monitor everything. The noise, the signal to noise ratio just goes through the roof, right? You can't do that. So you have to figure out, well, what do I need to watch? What logs should I look at? And then who reviews them and how often, right? So for example, I'll give you an example. When you have, if I had a critical file server, right? And maybe, and speaking of which, my factoid over here is 33% of folders are not protected in any way, right? If I have files, it might be HR, it might be my own documents, those, whoever is making connections to that file server should be people in my company. And I should throw off some sort of alert or log if that's coming from the outside or from, someone that is unknown to me. And because that could be the beginning or the early warning system that someone is actually launching some type of a ransomware or other type of attack on my company. And the question is, how often do I review that? And in some cases, you can actually have an automatic alerts set for certain activity. We talked about physical security already. I would add to this too. This is, of course, all dovetails into employee awareness. I think something that employees are not familiar with is that certain applications that they, apps that they get on their phone, you know how we all just agree to the terms and conditions. Sometimes what we agree to is access to our contacts, right? And what that means is if the personal home number or personal cell phone number or even personal information kept in the notes of a contact are part of now the vendor, that application is, you've agreed that they can, you're going to share your contacts, that may be inappropriate. And it's something that as a company you need to think about. That's why the blurring the lines between personal and professional with our devices can be very tricky at times. But that's a great example. I think yesterday we talked a bit about this. Storytelling is a very effective way and sometimes an engaging way for people to talk through and think through some of these cybersecurity related risks for your organization. And of course, backups. Oh, please, please, please. Regular backups, regular restores. I have shot myself in the foot by deleting things where I think, my God, what was I thinking? Why on earth would I delete this? Having the backup is just an amazing thing. You don't need to be attacked. I've attacked myself by deleting things that were really important that I shouldn't have. So, not enough coffee in the morning or whatever the problem was. Okay. All right, let's go ahead. I want to, in the interest of time, because I want you to have a chance to go through some of the exercises here. I'm going to pull up the third poll here. This is for technology. Let's find out what you're interested in. So the topics are network security, antivirus, encryption, monitoring physical security and secure backups. So go ahead and let's vote on this, if you would. Good. Monitoring and secure backups. Looks like monitoring is winning here. Yes. Okay. Monitoring won. Okay. I'm going to end the poll. It would be awesome if you got off of mute and let me know what specific, if there's a specific concern around monitoring. No? Okay. So deeper dive into monitoring. There are many tools out there. And I guess one of the things that I want to talk to you about is, first of all, you need to take a step back, and I would use a scenario focused exercise to figure out, okay, monitoring, like what is that? What do I monitor? Okay. So you have the ability to monitor endpoints, people's computers, people's activity. You can monitor folders that are accessed. You can have all kinds of things that can monitor. There's third-party tools. Some software allows you to do monitoring that's built in. So it's diverse and it can get overwhelming very fast. So on one hand, there is an inventory of like, what can I monitor? And even if I wanted it to, like, how would I monitor? Then comes the next step of saying, okay, this is a value or risk-based decision. Now that I understand what's out there, now let's zero in on what's truly important. So file shares, or maybe it is the third-party IT provider is actually going to help you with some of this. And it may be a negotiation, right? It may be something that you had access to, it was part of your contract, but you never used it because you had to do the work, right, ahead of time of knowing what to monitor. Then the other piece of it is the who will monitor and how often. And that is truly a risk-based decision, but it's also a value-based decision too. Because risk-based meaning, okay, what are the threats that are most likely relevant to me, to my organization? Or it may be I'm involved in contracting with DoD. Maybe it could be a military base here. It could be with the Washington Department of Transportation. There are certain regulations and requirements that are part of my world that may actually drive what you will monitor and how often, because there may be controls and regulations that will help you to understand that. Okay. But if you divide up your world, you can see there's a common denominator here in this, that you can't do everything. Even large companies can't do everything. There's no such thing as gold-plated security, right? So you need to make risk-based decisions, and you need to base them on what is most valuable to you in your organization. And if you haven't been around a lot of lawyers, you will know that there's actually this legal concept of commercially reasonable steps, right? Did I do something that's commercially reasonable? And especially in cybersecurity, but in other areas as well, risk-based decisioning is indeed a commercially reasonable approach, and one that doesn't require you to go out of business or to spend exorbitant amounts of money. Other questions on monitoring? Any other things that I didn't cover? Yeah. I don't see everybody, so if your hand goes up, I may not see you if I don't scroll by you here. Okay. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about this. The recommendations I would make for the people in people process technology for people, please look for and figure out who your cybersecurity point of contact will be. It is most likely that you will not have the wherewithal to hire for that role specifically in the small and medium-sized business space. I will tell you there are, I call it rent-a-CISO. There's that capability as well, and I do see people out there that do that. So you know, that's a part-time role. It's like some startups do rent-a-CFO. If you are a head of a department or the CEO, I really encourage you that an email or a memo to your organization stating that how important it is that protecting your company through proper cybersecurity practices is everybody's job, and it is a way for you to be able to be protected. An informed workforce is an extremely powerful tool because your employees want you to succeed, and you know, 99.99% of people are good. Everybody talks about, oh, the insider attack. As long as I've been in cybersecurity, that has not risen to the top of the cybersecurity risks for any organization, because generally people are good. And if they know how to be good and they know how to tell you, hey, I saw something suspicious, they're going to do it. So I would leverage that talent, and I think that that desire. Employees have to feel they need the buy-in in order to raise their hand and say, you know, something really bothers me here. I don't know if this is a problem or not. They need to know who to go to. They need a way to escalate. And of course, there's a lot of things that I say, well, you need to review on an annual basis. And I understand that most people would tell me, well, we don't have any time, downtime in our business. And yet the rhythm of any business isn't pegged or isn't constant all the time. Okay, you have a time in the rhythm of your business when annual review of policies and other annual business. It may be the annual review of your incident response, your business continuity disaster recovery plans, when it will be a natural time to do that. And please don't forget third-party risk management. Okay. Having a vendor vetting process in place is important. Think about who you currently have. If it is the cousin of somebody that worked here 5 years ago, we really like the person, but that person was never vetted, it doesn't mean you're getting rid of them. It just means that you're taking on the adult role of saying, okay, you know what, we probably should just go back and review that vendor process again, and just make sure that, you know, considering what our standards would be today, if we had to get that, you know, if we had to find that vendor new, where does this person stack up? And this is about security controls, right? Third vendor party. In terms of process, again, the assess and audit on a regular basis, it's the same thing. Look at the rhythm of your business. We're not telling you to do this at the busiest time, right? Having an incident response plan that sits in a binder somewhere or on a file share that has never been practiced, when you need it, I absolutely guarantee you, you will have the worst stomach ache of your life if you've never practiced this, because you'll find out everything that you didn't think of or what's wrong with it. The other piece I want to point out here is we haven't really talked about the joiner, mover, leaver process. Small and medium-sized businesses often have trouble with this. There's ways that people get onboarded in your company and get access to the right applications and systems and files and all of that type of thing, right? Might be physical access to with badges and so on. But when that person moves from one role to another, oftentimes those privileges are additive and not reviewed, and the old role privilege is taken away, and what they do is they get provisioned on. And this is probably a bigger risk in companies of all sizes. And most of the time, if it's a what I would call a hostile leave, meaning you fired the person, a lot of times we're buttoned down in that process because, oh, we got to make sure they don't have access to email and blah, blah, blah. But leavers, especially when they're friendly leaving, right? And it's not a hostile, it's not a firing situation. Oftentimes too, we can leave access to things to not deprovision appropriately. So JML, if you're involved in government contracts, this is a requirement. Okay, so you may be doing this already, but even if you aren't, there's a lot of access to systems that's regrettable later on. All right, let's see here. In terms of tech, you know that understanding your endpoints and especially any connections to the internet, right? The most inhospitable and dangerous neighborhood in the entire world. You want to make sure that you understand what your connections are to that. You want to take a look at the security of wireless to begin with. Make sure you don't have ad hoc systems. We talked about email, but there's also web protection tools. Many times your antivirus suite comes with malware protection against malicious websites, against email. I think yesterday something came up where sometimes there are very specific government portals that when you look at the URL at the top of the browser, you should see the little padlock and it's broken. I don't know what to really say about that other than the fact that obviously that's not good because it means that it is an insecure site. Even if it's public information, I guess I would just use the normal channels of escalation to say that that's not so great and it's a bad user experience. I mean, and for yourselves, you have websites. I'm sure it's public information. There's nothing, there that is of, of great, it's that you need to protect. But it's also about your image to the outside world. You want to make sure that those are properly protected. And if indeed you're collecting information, that all of those things are appropriately protected. So, there's two different things, as sort of a client and a server side to this, but going back and taking a look at your posture is, I think, very important here. And of course, that's what encryption is for, right? Or TLS in the web world, or when you're taking a look at making sure that phones and laptops are encrypted, password protected, so that if I leave my phone in an Uber, somebody doesn't have a chance to just simply go through my entire phone. We talked about most of these. Securing your backups and having a good, knowing that you can recover or you can restore information allows you to tell ransomware attackers where they can go. Physical security is important. I just don't want to forget that. The first immutable law of security is if I've got physical access to a device, I own that device. Even if it's encrypted, it's still, it's better, but it's not the end of the story. If I have unlimited time and resources to break into that device, I probably can. So I very much encourage all of you to take a scenario focused approach, and really scenario focused approach is another way of saying risk-based. Large companies can't afford gold-plated security. Think about what strategic investments you want to make on an annual basis. And don't think about this as something that, oh, I have to do this all at once. The truth is that you can't do it all at once. That's likely the scenario for you as it is for any large company. What you need to do is think about the highest value things. How are you protecting them? What insecurities do you have? And then think about the budget and what types of strategic investments you can afford to make over time. So it may be that the big push this year is I'm going to protect myself against ransomware attacks. So that means there's going to be a deep dive into my backup and restore capabilities. And then I'm going to make sure that all of my remote workers have at least some measure of malware protection and antivirus protection on their computers. And we're going to have a discussion about social engineering and why, different ways that attackers can come at me. So I would maximize existing resources. That's why get your workforce working for you here in terms of awareness, right? They'll come back to you, I think, and you'll see a real good return on that investment. End-to-end thinking and risk-based approach is very important. That's what we're doing here. The other piece of it is I want you to think like a hacker or a bad actor. All of you represent different businesses and different size businesses, different industries. It's important for you to ask yourself, okay, so if I were a bad guy, if I got physical access to my office, what does that mean? Like what horrible thing could happen? If a bad actor got access to, or if I have a weak third-party IT vendor, and I've already found out that my backups aren't secure, and we had a terrible time going through the restore process. It eventually happened, but not in a timeliness that I need. Well, you know, now's the time to start thinking about, okay, that becomes a risk that is increased to me, because it looks like the protections that I have against that aren't as robust as I would like them to be, right? So thinking like a hacker or a bad actor is, look, there's plenty of information in the news that tells me that ransomware is a problem. Okay, well, maybe I'm going to do a risk-based analysis of just exactly how exposed am I? And now you're able to actually think about the strategic investments and the actions that you'll take as a result. So this sort of end-to-end thinking, this risk-based approach, I really think is the highest value for you in terms of a small and medium-sized business that can afford to put all of your hard-earned money into gold-plated security, or even silver-plated for that matter. I mean, it's just a lot of, this is very expensive, I think, as most of you know. All right, let me just stop there before we get into the practicing part of this. Okay, I think I was a little bit quicker today. I want to stop and take questions or comments. You're way too quiet, I'm suspicious. I have to start picking on people individually.
So Lynn, this is Leslie. Back in the day, when there were 5.5-inch floppy disks, which is circa what, 1984, probably longer than some of our audience has been around. We used to have a daily backup, a weekly backup, and a monthly backup. And, we would every day, we would, this was before everything was so automated. And it was also when there was like a 20 megabyte hard drive.
Yes.
But it was inordinately slow backing up, and we never had to restore anything. We never tested it, but, it was a really simple, methodical process. At the end of the day, when you're closing the store and you do your cash count, and you do your backup, and then you would cycle. And it's evident to me throughout the last few decades, things like procedure manuals are critical to operations, and especially in technology. It's exactly what you identified in regards to, transition of personnel, changes in technology, that it really needs a robust review and update in a timely manner. And so, everything that you mentioned was really, really valid. And I could see this whole thing from the top down, the CEO, the CFO, and then, if you're a new employee and you don't even know what questions that you need to ask, how are you preparing your new employees just on the technical side and the security side?
Right.
So it's a big HR aspect as well as a technology aspect. And yeah, and it all comes together, doesn't matter if you're doing purchasing and receiving, or you're doing sales and marketing, whatever it is, they all have some commonalities in regards to using your server and, the portals that may be wide open, when you're meeting with a client. Yeah, it's scary stuff.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you, Leslie. The truth is, when you think about a security company, RSA actually lost some of their intellectual property. I mean, think about this, right? We're talking about a multiple billion-dollar company, and it's who's in the cybersecurity space because of a department that just had an FTP open, right? And what happened was their crown jewels are getting exfiltrated out of the company through this. Nobody had to break down a door. Nobody had to, spend hours figuring out, ways that they're going to get in the building. It's the world has changed, Leslie. It's absolutely true, and I've certainly been in that situation as well, as I started out my computing life too in the mid '80s, and it's really. And a lot of what we're doing today is dated, or we haven't really gone back and reviewed and rethought, practices. Backup is just a great example. Today, I think a lot of you are probably backing up via cloud solutions. And you know what? Storage isn't, the storage cost isn't what it used to be. But you know what? Cloud isn't free either. Right? Having workloads in the cloud is not free. And even though it's a subscription service, what happens is over time, it can get costly. Or working through third-party vendors, you don't know exactly what their process is, right? So how are they doing complete and incremental backups? And then how, somebody in your organization should know the backup procedures down to the procedure level. Right, and the frequency, and the lack of restore. I can't even begin to tell you how many even sophisticated organizations fall down on this, because it's it's boring. It's boring and mundane, right?
Well, and part of the problem also is, if you're a smaller company or even a medium company, and internally you do not have the personnel or the knowledge base to find these best aspects for your IT department, then you're looking at a third party, and it's scary, because you have to do your due diligence in interviewing a third party to protect your data. And, they may say, well, we take care of all the hospitals or attorneys' offices in the region, and, we can take care of you too. But, it needs validation, and it's a tough road to go.
Right. Well, third-party risk managers too will tell you there's the tricks of the trade as well. When you're negotiating these contracts, one of the things you can put in the contract is an annual restore, right, as part of the service that they provide for you. So they're going to have to do a test restore, and maybe you'll determine, that might change every year, but there are things that can be embedded in the contract that can help you. And it also, what it does is it reminds you too that in the rhythm of your business, there'll be a time when you know that you're going to stop on an annual basis and test restore, so that, if a physical or cyber or whatever disaster happens to you, you can respond appropriately. And it's just, in terms of business continuity, we live and die now by, things that are electronic. We're all based in these systems and not by paper anymore. Although I am a big proponent, there's certain pieces of paper that need to be printed and locked in a cabinet off-site somewhere if it's important. The rule of 3.
So thanks. And we have about 10 minutes left.
Okay,
So we'll
let's
leave
run
it-
through this here. Yeah, thank you.
I-
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. I think that.
Yes, I have a question for you. It has to do with the number of factors. This is going to be a little technical, but it should make sense. The more things that are correlated to determine what attacks are going on and the amount of attacks, the frequency, and where. Normally, it will start at those ports at the firewall, but then it can come from many different ways. The better the correlation system is to identify where the attacks are coming from is very important. However, the cost of doing that monitoring and getting a staff built to identify it is a really tough decision to make. How many people to bring on board in the computer security department? But the more you correlate, the fewer people you need in order to quickly do the analysis and inform. So do you have a rule of thumb?
That's a really good question. That's an excellent question, actually, because I think what you're saying is that one of the changes that's happening, one of the evolutions that's going on right now is where security has been, the Security Operations Center or the SOC, right? Where you think about all these analysts, looking at logs and doing all of this work, right? Machine learning and AI has moved us, and the whole SIMs, right? These are what you're talking about, these correlating events and figuring out all these alerts. What's happened is this has caused less human, right, roles that are needed to find all of this, right, and the reporting can be more robust. And I do agree with that. They are expensive, right? When I think about for a small, medium-sized business, but again, I think that it is a strategic investment that you might think about. And there's a lot of vendors out there, and I'm not, I'm not trying to push any particular vendor here, and I don't want to, but it's hang on here. I'm going to, and it's terrible. It's one of these acronyms. I don't want to. SI.
But you got it. You got it.
There we go. I'm gonna. Oops, did I do? Oh, Leslie, I just sent that to you and not to everyone. Hang on here. There we go. There we go. So when I say SIM, that's what I'm talking about. It's a security information monitoring system that allows you to, right, what Mr. Ross is talking about here is that it allows you, instead of having a human look at, thousands of alerts, what it does, it helps you to correlate and say, well, gosh, you know what, I'm getting an awful lot of improper pings against a particular port. And oh, by the way, over here, it looks like somebody is trying to come into, into my, doing an ingress attack, or God help me, I see egress, I see information going out of my organization that shouldn't. Yeah, that's the thing you don't want to see either. Yeah, that's a very good question. So the point here, just to reiterate again, because I think it's important, is that there are products out there when you're thinking about strategic investments that you can think about using these tools such as SIMs to help you to correlate unusual or improper activity to help you narrow down and respond more quickly and more accurately and what exactly you're up against. Good, thank you. That's great. Okay, so the thinking about ransomware end to end, just very quickly here, as you can see, email is the biggest vector, but user practices too, and what gullibility really is another way of saying too, social engineering. But you can see we're getting a lot of the same old. Notice though, I want you to just notice that clickbait isn't near the top. of that. I think a lot of us have this impression that, oh, the days of click a link and you're dead. Thank God vendors have done more to combat this. And then also the AV and malware folks are doing more to shut down and address some of these malicious links. But we're still getting some very, very sophisticated emails. I frankly can't tell some of the phishing emails that are sent from my bank. They look just like they came from the bank. So when we think about a problem like this, like ransomware, again, it's a lot of this is in rules of 3 in cybersecurity. We think of prevention, detection, and then your ability to respond. And it's going up an escalation ladder, if you will. So the best place to be is to prevent. And we've talked ad nauseum about backups. I hope that if nothing else that you take away, you will go back and look at this. Patch management is important. And critical patches, especially. Your vendors will tell you whether or not it is security related and if they consider it critical. When you hear it's a cybersecurity related and then you hear the word critical, you've got to really think about, I mean, unless it's breaking your, your HR system, or you can't, you can't do your taxes or whatever, you really need to apply those patches. Multi-factor authentication is one thing, right? Making sure that people just don't have to remember 1,000 passwords so that they're writing it on the side of their desk on a folder. But least privilege is another thing. Just think about who really actually have to have access to this. Okay, and I think the last piece, the last bullet here is: do you need or already have cyber insurance? Just if you're not aware of it, there are cyber insurers out there. There's lots of schools of thought on this. Large companies do spend money on cyber insurance. So I just want you to know that's available, and may be part of a discussion you're having when you have your annual, when you review your annual insurance needs as a business. With detect, you really do want to monitor file activity. And again, it's we talked about this: who does it, how often, and what tools are you using? There are threat intelligence paid subscriptions. They're expensive. There are some even Seattle-based, I think, vendors out there. Detection, so that's another way to do detection. If you have, by the way, if you have a software product that you're putting out there, it might be a cloud-based, it may be on-prem, it might be whatever. Part of this too is to do pen testing. And this is where someone actually goes in as a third party and does penetration testing against your particular product. That's something to keep in mind as well. That's a big risk if you're in the software business. Audit, obviously, and of course, part of detection too is just as Andrew pointed out today, two well-known companies got ransomware attacked. Keeping up with news, it's easy to get news feeds, whether it's through Google News or otherwise. You can specify that getting headline news on cybersecurity and data breach related information, even if you're just skimming the headline or just the what do you call it, the email message title, can be of value to you. I understand this isn't everybody's business and you're not looking at this every day, but it may be enough to say, oh, wait a minute, wow, so Seattle's largest accounting firm just got, hacked. What was that about? Because where there's success with one, there may be another. And if you're in that same business or that vertical, that may be of interest to you. So keeping up with the news to some extent, not going overboard, I think is important in this area. And of course, whether it's incident response or disaster recovery, if you have a process, and so often I have found that attacks against companies absolutely fail or never happen because people follow processes, and they're well aware of what they should do. Big question here in responsive world is, can someone be reached out of hours? or when somebody, key personnel is on vacation. Who's the backup is really what this is, right? If you had to contact law enforcement, does someone even know how to do that, right? If you have insurance, right? If your business is down, right? How do you plan for that? And also in the ransomware world, of course, the big question is, do I pay or not pay the ransom? I've been asked point blank, would I suggest that someone pay the ransom? And the answer is, you well know, is it depends, because many people have, because they don't have any other choice. But that's why we loop back, right? In the rinse and repeat, we go back up or down the ladder to prevention and detection, so that we don't find ourselves here. Okay. So please review your security posture using the people process technology we talked about today. And I encourage you to reuse, modify, use this as a tool for your own organization. It's a little bit about my business and what I do, and how to reach me. Am I in time here? Yes, I'm on time.
Absolutely perfect. So thank you, Lynn. This has been riveting, to say the least. It really is a call to pay attention for your small business or your medium-sized business. And we just want to thank you so much for taking the time to present to us today. And for our participants, you'll find this information available in the chat. So if you have any questions or want to reach out to Lynn, you can reach her at lynn@digitalresilience.us. So thank you, Lynn. We appreciate
You betcha.
everything you've done. Thank you.
I'll hang in here and figure out my other meeting then, so I can be for the next.
All right,
thank you.
thank you.
Okay.
Welcome back, everyone. And we're going to finish up our day with Port of Seattle with Mr. Ron Jimerson, who is the Chief Information Security Officer. And it'll be kind of exciting to hear what all, going on with them, and what you as small businesses can do to prepare to do work with them. So with that, I'd like to introduce Ron Jimerson.
Thank you, Leslie. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here to talk with you this afternoon. I am, as advertised, Ron Jimerson, the Chief of Information Security for the Port of Seattle. I've been in the position for approximately 2 years. Before that, I was doing the same job with the city of Tacoma. So unlike the last presentation that you just had regarding cybersecurity, I'm going to talk to you about cybersecurity and information technology and some of the opportunities at the port that you as a small business can take advantage of in helping us resource our information technology and supporting our information systems. So you may be thinking that, well, this is a cybersecurity department. Well, cybersecurity and information technology work side by side at the port. So we're heavily integrated with each other. In a lot of organizations, the information security function is within the IT department, but we're external, and there's some reasons for that, which help us work and help each other out quite well. We work in harmony quite well. So as I get into this presentation, I'll just let you know that the intent here is really to give you some insight on some of the opportunities that the port has to offer and some methodologies that you can look at as to how you can gain access in engaging with the port. So with that, I'll talk a little bit about, if I could get my slide to move, a little bit about my department and give you a quick overview. We're responsible for the strategies and operations and putting in the protection mechanisms that you just learned about to protect our data at the port. And you may be familiar with your last briefing about identifying, protect, detect, and respond. These are functions that we are constantly programmed around and maintaining security within the port's information systems. This is based off of what we call the NIST framework, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. So it's a mature framework in helping us grow and mature our cybersecurity technologies and helping protect the port. So this is just a little bit of an overview about what we do, and I'll get into that a little bit more deeper here in just a second. But first, I want to talk about a little bit about the port overall. So through the port's century agenda, we've come up with several priorities. Our executive leadership has put together interwoven priorities, which are based on equity, serving the community, sustainability for our environment, safety and resiliency, as well as physical responsibility. As you can see, cybersecurity is built into that. Not only is it built into that, but it's integrated with the various technologies that we have across the port. You can see that's aviation, maritime side of the house, our economic development, and our corporate functions as well. And we're able to do that with a commitment of adopting the organization through innovative and continuous improvement. So that gives you some high-level strategy that we have at the port. And this is important to understand as you think about how you might want to engage with the port and helping us provide some of our technology solutions. So I'll pause here and just give you a little bit of more in-depth background as to what we do in our information security department. That can probably be broken down into about 3 basic components: governance, risk management, and our operations. So with governance, we work extensively with our information technology department to put together policies and standards that detail how we configure our IT systems, what particular type of protection controls and tools that we need to have in place to protect those systems. And then we're also responsible for audit and compliance, because the port processes credit cards and performs other types of financial functions and other sensitive data that the port has to handle. We're obligated to adhere to certain security standards within our information system. So that's a big chunk of what we do at the port in the information technology and information security departments. And that's done through communications, partnerships, and then we have a privacy management component built in that. In the middle, under risk management, anytime we're putting in new software or hardware, we're always taking a look at what the risk is in adding or either taking away a technology solution. So anytime we put something in our infrastructure, we've got to be aware as to how that is going to interact with other types of technology solutions and things like that. So we're constantly performing security assessments to see, what those compatibility issues are. And through that, other functions, we were able to look at how these systems operate with current assessments. We do gap analysis, and as we introduce more hardware and software into our environment, as I just spoke about, that's a change management component that we have to adhere to keep the flow of products and new technologies at the port. At the port, we are always integrating, seems like, new technologies. We're always addressing legacy systems, planning for the future. And I'm amazed at the amount of projects that are constantly ongoing at the port, of how technology is being integrated across the port. It's an ongoing, and I can tell you, I see lots of opportunities, not just for big businesses, but smaller organizations that could be involved with the port and helping us fill our objectives of trying to strengthen our technology posture across the port. Under our operations area here that you see, where this is a little bit of a longer list, it's a lot more labor intensive. We have a lot more resources dedicated to this area. But overall, while you read through this listing that I have, the first one, incident management, is really the core of what we do in operations. So most organizations are attacked on a daily basis. Some don't even know it, but with the proper cybersecurity technology and tools in place, a lot of these threats are thwarted off. So there are some times when we do have threat actors that make their way through our systems, or they are affiliated with a third party that we're associated with that we have to deal with. So those are, that's constantly being addressed, that's constantly being worked. So we don't just rely on the technology that we have in place, but we also have partners where we receive threat intelligence. We balance that up against other types of information that we receive, along with the technology that we have in place that helps us manage our technology systems. And towards the bottom of this list, a big component of that is user awareness training. The biggest link, the weakest link in cybersecurity is the human element there. So we're constantly campaigning for individuals to show a certain amount of vigilance in how they're handling our IT systems, as well as managing port data. And in the event that we would have a significant cyber event, of course, we would have to perform certain types of forensics to help us eradicate whatever type of variant that we would have that would potentially attack our systems. And then lastly, I have IT security architecture down there, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as I get more into the presentation. So you're probably wondering, as a small business, how can you do business with the Port of Seattle? Well, I'll tell you, I've got a few things listed here, and I'll just quickly run down those. As a business, you should be able to market your materials designed around what we do at the Port of Seattle. A lot of businesses connect with the port and try to offer something that we have no use for. And things like that could be avoided if we have a very, very informative website that we welcome all organizations to visit and to see how they could get involved with the port. So we find that it's very helpful to have a good understanding of what we do before you try to sell us something or get engaged. So that comment is there for a reason, believe me. And then what I would advise, and you may have heard this before, is to register your business on our Vendor Connect. So this is one of our contracting databases. So if we understand what type of service or products that you provide, this is a helpful resource for us to be able to navigate to an organization like yours and get you engaged with a need that we have, especially in the IT arena. And then there's also, you're encouraged to register and attend one of our PortGen sessions, like you're doing right now. So we have other sessions that take place that are very informative, especially geared towards, smaller businesses, women and minority-owned businesses, things like that. There's already some presentations out there on our site that you can view and you can take advantage of. And I think one of the great opportunities that affords you some insight and visibility as to where we're headed as a port, if you take a look at our future solicitations site that we have out there, it gives you an idea of some potential projects or things we're thinking about implementing. And you can scale down and look at those on the information technology side of the house, so you can have a better understanding if you've got a solution or something that you can provide to the port. And if you've got questions about that, I mean, we do have a website that I think is pretty fruitful with information, but you can always find a person behind that website to get some more information or get your questions answered, and that's our diversity in contracting. I put the website down here that kind of helps you navigate through some of the bid opportunities that we have coming open. If you just go to the www.portseattle.org, you can go to the business tab and you can continue to navigate around our website to really educate yourself on what we might be looking for and the process for getting engaged. I wanted to zero in on a few things that may be that are coming up in the next year in 2022 that some of you may have some interest in, and that is our IDIQ contracting needs that we see coming up. Now, IDIQ is indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity. What this does is allow us to contract with a vendor and keep that vendor on a contract for several period of times, multi-year type of contract, without having to have them, recompete year after year. So I think this is about a 3-year limit that we have on this process. And specifically the way that I have this listed here is, you'll see the first one as an enterprise management system. So we'll be looking for some outside resourcing to help us with this. We'll also be looking for some additional help in contracting for general services with our IT department in particular, helping out with things like VM hardening and data center services, things like that. We have another potential opportunity in incident handling. We want to be prepared to contract for some assistance if we have a significant event that takes place, or if we just need a short-term assistance, maybe some forensics or something like that. So those are some of the things we have in place, as well as the potential of some consulting and a security assessment. But these are just a few opportunities that I want to make sure that I highlighted, because these are probably going to be more visible than some of the other things that you're going to see. Now, as I mentioned before, we've got a future procurement opportunity site that you can go out. What I've done here, and this is, it's a longer list than what you see here, but I've consolidated most of the specific IT related projects and opportunities that are projected to be pursued here in the next 2 to 3 years. So that gives you some visibility as what's on the horizon with us, and maybe you see something there that you feel that you can get engaged with us at the port to help facilitate some of these projects. And one of the things that I wanted to make sure that I put into this presentation was some cautionary sales tactics. I know that as a small business, you may have a product or a service that you provide, but know that we in information technology and IT security, especially as decision makers, we're pursued heavily. We're always asked to look at a demonstration from an organization or have an assessment done so that a vendor can show us really what their product does. But we get so many of these types of solicitations that often they become junk mail. They get ignored and they get deleted and things like that. So I mean, sometimes we will respond to some of these things, and we're always respectful towards unsolicited members or people that are pursuing the opportunities with the port. But just keep in mind that these are heavily often heavily amount of information that we're getting that we just don't have the ability to manage a lot of times. So just keep that in the back of your mind. The old-fashioned tactic of cold calls. Yeah, we still have that out there. We still receive calls from vendors offering us their solutions, what they can do for us, and things like that. This can be very burdensome too. We're just, especially with COVID going on right now and the amount of resource constraints that have been put upon organizations like the port, we really have to manage our time wisely right now. So, we don't mean to be rude or anything like that, but, cold calls should be thought out. So if you do your research and you think you've got a compelling reason why you should call directly to one of our departments to offer us some assistance or talk about a solution or a product that you deliver, please think that through. And there are other ways, especially like I talked about before, of registering in our port registry for businesses, and so we can connect with you. We would prefer to do it that way. And if it's something that we really feel that we need, we'll definitely contact you. There's other network networking opportunities, such as forums like this. And once the world returns to some type of normalcy, we will engage in in-person, seminars and IT conferences and things like that. Some of these things are being done online right now, but you can get involved with some of those activities as well, and engage with us, and engage with us as well. So I wanted to make sure that I put a little bit of a diagram out here to kind of give some visibility as to how it works. How do you, once we've got some interest in your product or your solution, how do we bring you on board? How do we engage with you further? Well, we're a government organization, so that means that we do have our bureaucracy built in, just like most to large size organizations do. So when it comes to IT and IT security, we have to have a requirement established. Is there a need to put a new solution in, a new server, a new firewall, a new type of switch in our infrastructure? So a requirement has to come up, and it doesn't come necessarily from IT. It may come from one of the businesses within the port. It may come from the aviation side of the house. It may come from the maritime side of the house. That could come from the corporate side of the house. So we just don't think of new solutions and try to implement them. They come from a variety of ways. And then once the need, or it's thought that there is a need, if it's a high dollar amount and if it's going to be some complexity to that implementation, we put together a business case to try to justify that need versus other alternatives, project what the costing would be like, and the time and resources needed for implementation. And then we would think about the budgeting process. Do we currently have funds to do that? Or are we going to have to budget for next year to be able to make that happen? And then as we're able to move on to the procurement process, we get a project manager assigned. You can see where this is going. It's a process. It can be a very slow process. Not all of what's drawn here is followed to the letter, depending on the size and complexity. There may be some things omitted in that process. But as we get into the RFP and RFQ process, and we start to engage with vendors about what their solution is, we've got some interest. We're getting that up to our architecture folks to take a look at how would that really fit in our environment. So we would bring you in as a vendor to talk about, hey, this is a solution hosted in the cloud. How does this fit into our current environment? What controls do you have in place? How are you protecting our data? Where's the data traveling through? Things like that. That could even, depending on how large size and scope of the project, we could go through what we call a proof of concept. We may want to see that product demonstrated to see how that performs in our environment as well. And then we can, through that process, we may try one or two or multiple vendors just to see which one performed the best, which one is more preferable to us at the port. Then we go through a vendor selection process, and that can add additional time, it does add additional time, because we go through the contracting, the legal, the purchasing process. And as you see these arrows flow in different ways, keep in mind, well, now it went to contracting, then we got to go back to vendor selection, we got to go back to architecture. So there can be some bottlenecks in trying to implement a solution that you might be offering. So the takeaway here is to understand that there's some patience required to get your solution or your services in place, depending on the complexity of what you have or what you're offering us. So this just gives you a little bit of an idea. Most businesses, like I said before, medium to large size organizations use some type of a structured process in place that it's going to force you to take some time if you're going to work with organizations like ours, depending on the complexity again. And while I'm on the procurement process, I want to explain to you that I think which would be really helpful to understand a little bit about our resourcing and some options that we have. So when we select a vendor, or we think we've got a need for a service, we have the ability to purchase direct if it's under $50,000. Going back to that previous complicated slide that I did show you, that amount of money, and with a smaller type of purchase, a lot of those steps would probably be eliminated. So we would expedite that process quite well. So this is for purchases that are $50,000 or less, and that also excludes taxes. So moving on, we have what we call a 3-quote process, whereby we solicit for goods or services from a vendor that are under $150,000, excluding tax. And we're just required to go out and get 3 quotes. So folks in IT looking at trying to bring a new software solution on that maybe not be that expensive, we would just have to go out and get 3 quotes and then decide which one that we wanted to utilize. And then another vehicle that we have is to advertise, the competitive process. This is more for our bigger projects, our more expensive projects. We go out there and you'll be able to see opportunities on our CPO site or portal that we have out there, where you can see where these things are advertised and how they bid out with the specifications that are embedded in there. We also have direct solicitations. So if you provide a product or a service, an IT service that it's so unique that it can only be done by you, or is it done in a special way that not too many people have that type of skill set or that type of product or service, then we can do direct solicitation. And one of the vehicles that we would use would be our database registry. So you can see how important it is to be connected with that database. And one last item I'll talk about is intergovernmental cooperative agreements. And that's under the revised codes of Washington 3934. So basically, if a government organization in the state is already on a contract, we can use that same contract, or we could piggyback off that contract without having to do the competitive process as well. So it may or may not be something as a small organization that you can connect with, but I wanted to make sure you had some visibility on it, because we often ask vendors, hey, do you do business with any other government agency? And if you do, that affords us a vehicle to piggyback off of, to eliminate some bureaucracies in trying to procure your service or your product. And a couple of other things that I wanted to bring up that you should consider when you do business with the port in an IT capacity. And that is, think about data handling, storage, and sharing. We're going to be asking you, hey, how are you handling our data? If you're dealing with our data, how's that data being stored? How's that information being shared? I'm just drawing out a few things that we have on some of our checklists that we would be asking you as a vendor to provide with us. So just kind of want to get ahead of the game here and give you some visibility into this. And then we often, since we're talking to IT, or an IT solution of some type, we have to take a look at the parameters if you're going to be interfacing your network systems with our network in some capacity. In other words, if you're working remotely, say with your own computers, and you're doing work on behalf of the port, you're remoting in and you're working on servers, or you're helping us build a firewall, there's certain parameters that we're going to want you to adhere to. So these parameters will include how are you tunneling into the organization, and the criteria and parameters around that, about how your infrastructure is secured, things like that. I'll talk about that a little bit more in just a bit. And then, we're going to want to know what your incident handling obligations, and we're going to have to talk about that and what the expectations are out there. And the reason why I bring this up is because a lot of the data breaches that you hear about today, really, a lot of them are more and more are being connected with third-party providers. So we want to make sure that, and this is from lessons learned, that if you come into the port and you're assisting us with a technology resource or something to that effect, that that you've got your act together. So we don't try to figure out, how your system got corrupted, which which eventually corrupted our system, and then we've got a big snowfall effect in place. So these are some things to think about. I put the reference down here again for NIST security standards. So you as an organization, if you're going by some of the practices that NIST has out there, then you're probably on your way to being in good shape and helping us support us in our IT systems. So more about integrating services. So SaaS, software as a service, and cloud services are becoming more and more prevalent, especially with the port, where we're moving more and more of our technologies to the cloud, and we're contracting out more with software services. What I wanted to share with you here was, as we do that, and if you're a provider that provides these type of services, keep in mind, we are going to do security assessments. We've got checklists that asks, how's that information being secured, what your backup plans, what your reliability rates are, things like that. So you would be going through that process, as I pointed out before, the architectural process, and we would have our engineers and our security professionals. They would ask certain questions about how these things are being taken care of. Oftentimes, when we are having architectural reviews with that vendor, we take a vote whether or not it's going to work for us, or we need to go back and get more information from the vendor before we approve that technology to be implemented in our infrastructure. Another thing could include what we call SOC 2 considerations. These are a set of policies, controls, and standards that some maybe larger organizations have to adhere to, just to prove that they've got the security components within their infrastructure that aren't going to jeopardize anybody else that's interacting with them. So sometimes we ask for that, depending on how large the organization is and what the service entails, how sensitive of the data we're going to be dealing with. And then there's access control considerations as well. When you contract out to the port, we have to be very careful that we understand who is going to have access not only to our network, but to the systems that are connected to our network. So we want to be sure that just because we contract out with a third-party vendor, they're not going to give control to all of their employees to access our systems. So we have to have some provisions in place for that as well. And then there's on-premise services. We've got security assessments that are conducted as well. And then there's the access control considerations that we're going to be looking at. So I put this blurb down here with the asterisks on the federal mandate for contract management capability maturity model. And if you haven't heard, that's a requirement that if you're dealing with the federal government, you've got to have some type of security certification out there, that really shows that you're compliant with the security parameters that are necessary to protect data, information, your resources, and things like that. That's not required of us at the port, but I can tell you that if you're doing the things that we're asking you to do and you're following some type of security framework, then you're probably pretty close or to adherence with the standards that they have in that particular mandate. So I wanted to also point out some specifics that you would see in our contract language as a vendor providing some IT services. You would be subject to some additional security requirements at the port, depending on what your interaction is, and especially if you were going to be remoted in, as I indicated before. So that would be written into our contract language, so there's an understanding up front that there may be some additional requirements. We may ask for security scans of your network, if you're using your own systems, things like that. So those are requirements that will enable you to VPN through our current provider that we have. Getting into more of some of the network requirements out there, we would be, the expectation would be that your computer systems, your network that you're operating off of, providing services for the Port of Seattle, that you would have alert status, regarding some of your vulnerabilities that may come up, security patches, and some of the corrective actions that were necessary for you to do that. I can tell you, this day and age, having a business network, you're always going to have a need for security patches. You're always going to have vulnerabilities when you're popping up and showing up. So this is why we put this specific language into our contracts, and it's worded this exact way. So there's more about that too, if you can learn and as you get more engaged with the Port of Seattle. And one of the things, lastly, that I wanted to put out here is, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. If you haven't gone out there to this site and looked at the small and mid-sized business resources that they have out there, it's a good tool to use. There's some tool sets out there to help you manage your security program so that you can become more compliant and meet the expectations of the Port of Seattle when you're engaging with the Port of Seattle to provide various technology systems and things like that are out there. So I think that about wraps it up. You've heard me chatter quite a bit out there, so I can take the time now to answer any questions that you might have out there.
Thanks, Ron. We actually have a couple of comments and questions for you.
Sure.
Let me back up on the chat here. The first one is from Tina Boyd, which you may be familiar with her. She wants to know, how does an ICT business get a meeting with an ICT decision maker? It sounds difficult.
Well, I can tell you it is difficult. It's not always easy. I'll be transparent with you. It's not the easiest thing, but we can. I talked a little bit about the direct contact that's out there. We're not totally going to ignore someone that calls us or somebody that emails. That's one vehicle. But the best way to go would be through our contracting resources that are out there, especially as I indicated before, the diversity and contracting department that we have out there. They're a good vehicle to go to. So if you're able to have a discussion with them, there's ultimately a chance that we could get engaged with them, and then we could sit down and have that discussion. So if it were me, I'd be engaging directly with the contracting resources that we have put out there. As I indicated, also some of the conferences and seminars and things like that we no longer can attend in person, but some of these things do take place online, and that's another good networking vehicle to do as well.
Thank you. She did put a comment on here that Tina does plan to do a separate PortGen just on the ICT department. For years, it's been a challenge for WMBE and smalls to get their foot in the door. And she hopes to be able to call on Ron to participate in the first time ICT PortGen. And so
let me make a comment if I may as well.
Go ahead.
The Port is hungry for small businesses,
Yeah.
minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses. The Port is extremely hungry to get that type of engagement. The problem is we don't often find the right type of expertise that we're looking for to have those engagements. So there is a need to communicate more with our IT leadership. And we plan to do that, but we sit down and we talk about this. We talk about, as a matter of fact, in our budgeting process, all across the Port, we were required to answer questions about how we were going to include, diversity or equity within our budgeting process. And large part of that dynamic is part of small businesses. So. This is a topic that not only myself, but the entire Port is extremely hungry to get that business. So it's not like I'm telling you that we don't want you or we don't need it, but we certainly do. We certainly do want that. As a matter of fact, in my business goals each year in includes a certain component of that. So.
Thanks, Ron. We have a question from Marnie, who's my colleague at Washington PTAC, and she wants to know if you utilize the Department of Enterprise Services ITPS master contract, and if you do, how often do you do that?
Well, I can't tell you how often that we do that. I know that it has been utilized. I know that it's a resource out there that we can use. Sometimes when we weigh the option versus that contract versus the time frame when we need something and what the pricing structure is, sometimes they don't line up. So we probably are not leveraging that, to be honest with you, as much as we probably should be. But I can't give you an exact number.
Thank you. So we have a question from Eswar. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. How can we find out IT landscape and technologies in use at the port?
Well, you can have it. That goes back to having a discussion with port. But there's some things that, number one, you can assume. You can assume that we've got a network infrastructure in place. You may not assume that we have an operational infrastructure in place, but with a network infrastructure in place, they're always going to come with certain components, right? There's always going to be firewalls, switches. There's going to be endpoint protection solutions in place. There's going to be a need to have solutions, things like that. So the basic building blocks of network infrastructure, that's with any organization. Now, to get more in depth on what maybe some of our needs are and what we have in place, you can look at to what some of the contracting bids that we have out there, especially on the future requirements that I showed you in this presentation, and you can learn more by engaging directly with the organization. So I understand it's important to get in front of some of the people in the ICT department and the IT security department as well, but there are vehicles to do that.
Thanks, Ron. So that's it for the written questions. So we'd like to open it up for a discussion with our participants and Ron. If anybody has any questions, go ahead and unmute yourself and we'll move forward on any questions you might have, or if you have any comments, either one.
Hi, this is Ishwar from Riva Solutions. I have a follow-up question on the IT landscape. I was wondering if Port is a Microsoft Azure, or is it a multi-cloud environment, or is it predominantly a Microsoft Azure cloud or Amazon or?
Yeah, it's more Microsoft Azure oriented right now.
Okay.
So yeah, it's more Microsoft oriented. It's more Cisco oriented right now. I can at least tell you that.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Ron. This is Darcy from Integrity Networks. Thank you for the presentation. It was really informative. So my company, I have a question for you about roles and responsibilities within the IT group. My company does IT security along with physical security systems, so electronic intrusion detection, surveillance. It used to be that those were completely separate groups, but as technology has put those systems over the IT physical infrastructure, I'm wondering if that is handled under your group or what group those systems would be handled under.
So we struggled with that a little bit too. We've had to wrestle with that as well. So a lot of the physical systems are out there with our operational technology folks, especially out at the airport and maritime. The networking side that they operate off of, we've got some interaction, but we've got, I guess the appropriate answer is there's shared responsibility. Traditionally, that hasn't been with us necessarily IT responsibility, but it's kind of a shared responsibility. And a good example of that is our what's the system I'm trying to think of? Our access management system that we're revamping right now, revising or upgrading. that we're putting in right now. The responsibility of that system is with the owner out at the airport, but the technology and how that's being implemented, that's with our information technology as well with some of our technical folks out at the airport. So really, that just gets back to shared responsibility. We just, in cases like that, it's not just blanketed over to ICT. ICT would help facilitate that process with the technology reviews and having an understanding that the configuration and controls are in place. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that did. I just wanted to confirm, did you say that it was traditionally obviously shared now, but with the operational technologies group? Is that
well, I don't really want to use the word operations technology group, because the way that we're divided up in the port, we've got maritime, we've got airport. Typically on the operational side of the house, we've got electronic technicians that handle a lot of that stuff. But on the security side, we work, this information security department works with them to make sure that they're meeting those requirements.
okay? Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? I do want to mention that we have posted in the chat the link to the digital drop with Ron's presentation in it. So feel free to grab that from the chat. And I guess if we have no other questions, we'll let you out of class early.
I have one more question. This is Ishwar again.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, Ron, what do you use for help desk management or ITSM? Like, do you use ServiceNow or?
No, I'm familiar with ServiceNow. We used that at my last organization, but we're using Freshservice.
Freshservice, thank you.
Okay, last call. All right, well, thank you, Ron. This was really enlightening to those of us that are not exactly in the, the scope of what you do, but it'll be really worthwhile for me and my Washington PTAC colleagues to provide this information to our clients. So thank you so much.
Mickey, I have a question. Hold it. I have a question. I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Yes,
yeah, Ron, I apologize. I had to answer an all-important phone call, but I was enjoying, until that moment, your presentation. I really want to actively begin to see where I can come in and use it. I'm not in the chat. I don't have that eyesight to click and have it to do that, but I do want your presentation. I know of several areas that I know I can have a conversation with your organization or other parts of it concerning what I have to offer to contribute to your outcomes. Okay.
Sure.
So thank you for mentioning that. What we will do is I'll send you the transcript on the chat, and it's in simple text format. So you'll be able to see all the links and get all the resources that you need through that.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Very thoughtful of you from the very beginning, recognizing my accessibility needs. And Marnie, thank you as well in that regard.
So, okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. It was a really good session all around, and we're very appreciative of Ron Jimerson and with Lynn, who showed up earlier to do her presentation. So with that, we'll call it a day. We want to thank the Northwest Small Business Transportation Resource Center and the Port of Seattle for providing support for PortGen 2021. And of course, with that, we have Washington PTAC here represented. So if you have any questions or need additional resources, you can always tap into our PTAC World at washingtonptac.org. So thank you so much. And with that, we'll call it a day. Thanks, Ron. Thanks, Lynn.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.